Republican has dropped a bill that would increase penalties for protesters who block freeways. This was obviously a response to what happened a couple weekends ago on I-5 in Seattle. The bill itself is great. I love it. The question is, if it's passed, will it actually be enforced? This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. All right, this is the article from our friends over at the Center Square. Washington legislation would increase penalties on highway blocking protests. Of course, we had the holy grail of highway blocking protests in Seattle a couple weekends ago, middle of the day. Pro-Palestine demonstrators, they came out, blocked I-5 at the worst place to block it, which was the intent, right? The intent for them is to get the most attention, to cause the most disruption. This is right by the off-ramp to go to Harborview Medical Center. And we saw there were multiple ambulances that were caught in the backup. And I think the real frustrating part for people is not that, it is that it happened, but in Seattle, we're used to this. This has been a tactic of the far left for a long time, be it blocking individual streets during holiday shopping. I remember that being a tactic of the Occupy movement and the Black Lives Matter movement for many years. And sometimes they went on and blocked freeways. But this was an example of not only the fact that this environment has been allowed for, that they believed rightfully so that they could get away with this, but it had a disruption for around 6 hours on I-5. And then these protesters were allowed to walk away without any consequences. It's so immensely frustrating for law-abiding, hardworking people who are just trying to go about their day, and they get caught in these protests and they're held hostage, for lack of a better phrase. And then these protesters have no consequences for it. And I know the state patrol says, oh, we're working to track down the organizers and hold them accountable. I'm not going to hold my breath on that. This is what the political environment in the state for the past 15 years has allowed for. They've taken a hands-off approach to people who commit acts of criminal civil unrest. And this is the outcome. I really worry about what's next. They blocked the pro-Palestine demonstrators. They ruined the Christmas tree lighting. They went and blocked a bridge in the university district, shut that down. No consequences for the Christmas tree lighting disruption. And then, of course, they just keep going up. All right, we did that, got away with it. Did this, got away with it. Why don't we block I-5 in the middle of the day? They got away with it. Heaven forbid what's next. So in response to that, State Representative Andrew Barkis, a Republican, introduced House Bill 2358. Has a lot of co-sponsors. All of them are Republicans except one, which I was happy to see Representative Hackney, a Democrat, support this. I always say positive reinforcement is a good thing. And so I certainly want to give some positive reinforcement to Representative Hackney. A person is guilty of obstructing highways in disregard for public safety if the person acting with 3 or more persons together intentionally obstructs vehicular traffic on a state highway by walking, standing, or sitting without legal authority. The person's activity creates a risk causing injury to any person or property. The person's activity impedes an ambulance, or the person refuses or fails to disperse when ordered to do so by a police officer or public official engaged in enforcing the law. And it says obstructing highways in disregard for public safety is a Class C felony. A person found to have committed obstructing highways in disregard for public safety is required to pay a penalty of at least $5,000, which may not be reduced to an amount of less than $1,000. Upon finding that a person is subject to sentencing, the court must impose a sentence of a minimum of 30 days. And there's some other things it does, but basically it's strengthening the penalty for blocking a freeway and recognizing that this is a public safety hazard. And I like that has a little part in there that if you obstruct an ambulance, because that could be life or death. And so I think a Class C felony is appropriate. And I also think putting a minimum on it, because you have so many courts these days that are just absolutely giving people a slap on the wrist. And so a minimum of 30 days is a good punishment that would hopefully deter this sort of behavior in the future. The issue is, however, that there is already laws and a legal basis to remove someone from a freeway. Even without this, police, the state patrol, could have arrested these individuals who were blocking the freeway a couple weekends ago. The question is, if you add another bill on top of that, does it just send a statement, or are we going to have law enforcement agencies who are underneath politicians with the political will to actually carry it out. I mean, in my opinion, these should be federal crimes. You know, we should have the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Washington going after this tooth and nail. No different than, I'll give them credit, some of the protesters who they ultimately arrested, the rioters in the summer of 2020, who were lighting police cars on fire, who are now serving time in a federal prison. This is no less than domestic terrorism. Yet, so often, there are no consequences. So while I like the bill, while I support the bill, while I think the bill is necessary, is the state patrol, is the governor willing to let the state patrol enforce it? Because make no mistake, if it weren't for political forces at play, the state patrol would have made arrests. I have no doubt in my mind. If you have some of these protests in the city of Seattle, does the mayor of Seattle have the political will to allow the police department to enforce it? So we can pass all the bills in the world that take a tough on crime stance. But if there is not the political will to enforce those laws, then it doesn't do any good. And even though I'm happy to see one Democrat on this bill, it's pretty shocking that there aren't more. I take that as being on the side of domestic terrorists, being on the side of protesters who they don't care who is caught in that backup. They don't care the level of disruption that these protesters caused, because that's a voting base for them. Those are people who are on the left side of the political spectrum. So, again, I like the bill. I don't know, if it gets a hearing in committee, I think one of the benefits of it is it puts lawmakers on the record, yay or nay. And man, I would love to see the vote where you have Democrats who vote against something like this. So sometimes proposals can serve that purpose, to put people on the record on where they stand on really common sense policies. I wouldn't hold my breath that a Republican bill that has to do with public safety is going to get any traction. This really comes down to what we've been missing all along in this whole process, are people in power saying something. Be it the mayor of Seattle, the governor, the attorney general, the head of the state patrol, who's put out, some statements, but they're always delicate on the political front. People in positions to make a difference on these issues have to say something. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, a lot of these protesters are people who align with her politically. And I think it would make a big difference if someone like her came out and said, we cannot be blocking highways. That's not the right thing to do. Now, would they listen? I don't know. But someone like her saying something definitely helps foster an environment where other people are willing to act. So bills are great. Bills are important. But action and enforcement, there are no replacement for those two things. That's something that was brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org.